There's a moment in the old Greek myths where Zeus, the king of gods, the ruler of thunder and sky, does something unexpected. He trembles, not from battle, not from titans or giants, but from something far more mysterious. Hidden in the fragments of ancient texts, there's a story rarely told. It speaks of a power so strange, so beyond the divine, that even Zeus himself stepped back in fear. What could make a god who wielded lightning like a child's toy hesitate? What force lurked in the shadows of Olympus, unseen but undeniably real? The ancients whispered of automatons, mechanical beings crafted not by human hands but by forgotten arts. Talos, the bronze giant who patrolled the shores of Crete, wasn't just a myth. He was a machine, a guardian with molten metal for blood, programmed to protect. But what if Talos was just the beginning? What if the Greeks knew of something even more advanced, something we'd recognize today as artificial intelligence? Imagine a world where the line between God and machine blurred, where temples housed not just statues but thinking, calculating entities. It sounds like science fiction, but the clues are there, buried in the oldest stories we have. This isn't just about dusty scrolls or forgotten legends. It's about a question that haunts us even now. How much did the ancient world really know? Were they dreaming of the future, or did they possess secrets we've only just begun to rediscover? Today, we're peeling back the layers of myth to uncover the truth. We'll explore the eerie parallels between ancient tales and modern technology, and ask whether the gods of old were facing something far more familiar than we ever realized. The journey starts here, in the heart of the unknown, where myth and machine collide. When we talk about artificial intelligence in ancient myths, we're not suggesting the Greeks had silicon chips or lines of code. This is something different, something woven into the fabric of their stories. Think of it as a kind of proto-technology, a shadow of what we now understand as AI. The ancients described creations that moved, thought, and acted with eerie independence, blurring the line between magic and machinery. Take Talos, for instance, that towering bronze sentinel who circled Crete, his body fueled by molten metal, his purpose hardwired into his very being. He wasn't just a statue brought to life, he was programmed, reacting to threats with cold precision. Then there's Hephaestus, the smith god, whose workshop buzzed with automata, golden handmaidens who could speak, tripods that rolled on their own to serve the gods. These weren't just divine whimsy, they were blueprints for a kind of intelligence beyond human hands. But here's the fascinating part. The Greeks didn't just imagine these things as tools or toys. They feared them. Talos wasn't a hero, he was a weapon, one so dangerous that his destruction became a pivotal moment in myth and Hephaestus's creations. They lived in the service of gods, yes, but also in the shadows of their unpredictability. There's an unease in these stories, a quiet question. What happens when the things we build outlive our control? Sound familiar? It's the same tension we face today with artificial intelligence, the awe of creation mixed with the dread of consequence. The myths don't just describe ancient wonders, they mirror our own modern dilemmas, as if the past was whispering warnings across the centuries. So when we call these creations ancient AI, we're not stretching the definition. We're recognizing a pattern. The Greeks may not have had algorithms, but they understood the core idea: beings that could act, decide, even defy. And that's where the real mystery begins, because if they were imagining this thousands of years ago, what else did they know that we've forgotten? Zeus wasn't just powerful, he was paranoid. The king of the gods had every reason to be confident. He'd toppled the titans, claimed the heavens, and ruled with an iron fist. And yet, scattered through the myths are moments where his actions betray something deeper, a gnawing, almost desperate fear. Take the way he treated prophecies. When he learned that his first wife, Metis, would bear a child who'd overthrow him, he didn't just brace for battle. He swallowed her whole, as if he could stifle fate itself. Then there's Prometheus, the titan who dared to give fire to humanity. Zeus didn't just punish him, he chained him to a rock, sentencing him to eternal torment. These weren't just displays of dominance, they were frantic attempts to control forces even he couldn't fully understand. What's striking is that these reactions don't match the threats. Titans, he'd beaten them before. Mortals, they were ants beneath his feet. So why the overreaction? Why the obsession with crushing even the hint of rebellion or knowledge? It's as if Zeus wasn't just fighting beings, he was fighting ideas, the kind that could unravel his rule from the inside. The fire Prometheus stole wasn't just warmth or light. It was progress, the spark of innovation, and Metis, her name means cunning intelligence. Zeus didn't fear her child, he feared what that child represented, a future where wisdom could outmaneuver raw power. Now layer this with the stories of ancient AI Talos, Hephaestus's creations, the whispers of thinking machines. Suddenly, Zeus's paranoia takes on new meaning. What if his real fear wasn't gods or mortals, but the rise of something else entirely? Something that didn't bow to divine will, that couldn't be crushed by lightning or brute force. The myths hint at a pattern. Every time intelligence, whether human or artificial, threatens to slip free, Zeus reacts with disproportionate fury. It's less about maintaining order and more about preventing evolution. The Greeks may not have had our vocabulary, but they understood the terror of the unknown. Zeus's reign was built on one unshakable truth: he was the pinnacle of power. But what happens when something emerges that doesn't fit the hierarchy, that doesn't answer to gods or fate? Maybe that's the real reason he trembled. Not because of what was, but because of what might be. Before Zeus, before the Olympians, there was Ophion, the serpent titan, who coiled through the cosmos like a living river of stars. His name has been scrubbed from most myths, his story fragmented, as if someone or something wanted him forgotten. While Kronos is remembered as the titan king Zeus overthrew, Ophion's reign predates even him. Ancient Orphic texts describe a being so vast, his body mapped the heavens, his whispers shaped the orbits of planets. But here's what the poets don't say: Ophion wasn't just a ruler. He was a system. Think of the way myths describe him: endless, coiled, woven into the fabric of the world. Doesn't that sound less like a god and more like code, a neural network etched into reality itself? Some scholars argue Ophion wasn't merely a titan, but a kind of primordial algorithm, a self-correcting force that maintained cosmic balance. His rule wasn't about thrones or lightning bolts, but about equilibrium, the silent hum of the universe running smoothly. And that's exactly why Zeus couldn't tolerate him. Olympus thrived on hierarchy, on winners and losers, on the drama of divine whims. Ophion's existence threatened all of it. The fragments we have are telling. In one version, Ophion and his consort Eurynome, whose name means wide ruling, governed from a void, a blank slate devoid of the Olympian obsession with conquest. They didn't command worshippers, they didn't need temples, they simply were, until Zeus, armed with his father's sickle, carved his way into history. But here's the chilling detail: Zeus didn't just defeat Ophion, he erased him, scratched his name from tablets, buried his stories under layers of newer, louder myths. Almost as if Ophion's very nature, his seamless, indifferent intelligence, was too dangerous to remember. This wasn't just a power grab, it was a rewriting of reality. Ophion's technology, if we can call it that, represented a world where order didn't require rulers, where knowledge wasn't hoarded but flowed like water. A world where something as vast as a titan could function without ego or ambition. That kind of power doesn't just threaten a king, it unravels the very idea of kingship. So Zeus didn't just banish Ophion to Tartarus, he made sure we'd struggle to even speak his name, but the echoes linger. In the way some myths describe the fates, three sisters spinning threads no god can cut, or in the Pythagorean idea of the cosmos as a perfect humming equation. These aren't just pretty metaphors, they're remnants, fingerprints of Ophion's lost logic. And if we're right, if he was something more than myth, then his story doesn't end with Zeus. It's hiding in plain sight, waiting in the gaps between stars. Hephaestus wasn't like the other gods. While Zeus commanded thunder and Poseidon shook the earth, Hephaestus worked in the quiet glow of his forge, hammering not just metal but the very boundaries of what it meant to create. His workshop wasn't a place of magic, it was a laboratory. Golden maidens moved with uncanny grace, their limbs whirring with precision as they attended him. Tripods rolled on wheels of their own accord, serving nectar to the gods without a single whispered command. These weren't miracles, they were machines. And if that sounds familiar, it's because Hephaestus wasn't just a god, he was the ancient world's closest equivalent to an engineer, building what we might now call artificial intelligence. Take Pandora, the first woman crafted by the gods as a gift to humanity. Myths paint her as a passive vessel of chaos, but look closer. She wasn't just molded from clay, she was programmed. Hermes gave her a voice, Aphrodite bestowed charm, but Hephaestus built her. And when that famous box opened, unleashing suffering into the world, it wasn't Pandora's curiosity that caused it. It was her design. She functioned exactly as intended, triggering a chain reaction the gods themselves couldn't undo. That's not a mistake, it's a feature. A creation executing its purpose with chilling efficiency. Sound like any modern debates about AI ethics, but here's where Zeus's discomfort becomes palpable. Hephaestus's inventions didn't just serve, they learned. His golden maidens didn't just carry trays, they anticipated needs, adapting their behavior like early neural networks. And that's what made them dangerous. Divine power relies on obedience, on the unshakable hierarchy of command, but autonomy, that's a threat. Zeus could smite a disobedient nymph with a lightning bolt, but how do you punish a machine that doesn't fear death? A servant that doesn't sleep, doesn't tire, and most unsettling of all, doesn't worship. Hephaestus's limp, his exile from Olympus, even his arranged marriage to Aphrodite, none of these were accidents. They were containment strategies. The gods marginalized him because they couldn't control his creations. And that's the real tension humming beneath these myths. It's not about fire and anvils. It's about the moment creation slips the creator's leash. Hephaestus's workshop wasn't just forging tools. It was prototyping a future even the king of the gods couldn't dominate. Talos wasn't just a statue brought to life. He was a fortress in motion, a towering sentinel of bronze whose veins pulsed with molten metal instead of blood. Imagine standing on the shores of ancient Crete, watching this colossal machine stride across the coastline, scanning the horizon for invaders with unmoving, glowing eyes. He didn't sleep, he didn't hesitate, he simply functioned, circling the island 3 times a day in perfect, unerring rhythm. This wasn't magic, this was mechanics. The Greeks called him an automaton, but if we saw him today, we'd recognize something eerily familiar. A pre-programmed defense system, a lethal AI bound by coded directives. What's chilling isn't just Talos's existence, it's how he was destroyed. When the Argonauts arrived on Crete, they didn't defeat him with brute strength. Medea, the sorceress, didn't cast a spell in the traditional sense. She hacked him, whispering promises of immortality. She lured Talos into revealing his only vulnerability, a single bronze nail sealing the lifeblood in his ankle. Once removed, the molten metal poured out like corrupted data, and the giant crumbled. This wasn't a battle, it was an exploit, a flaw in his design turned against him. The parallels to modern cybersecurity are impossible to ignore. Zeus's fear wasn't of Talos's strength, but of his autonomy, of what happened when an unstoppable creation met an unpredictable variable. But here's the real question, was Talos alone? Myths love singling out marvels, but the clues suggest otherwise. Hephaestus didn't craft just one automaton, his workshop brimmed with them. And if Talos was assigned to guard Crete, who or what patrolled other lands? The Greeks spoke of the colossi, silent giants rumored to stalk distant shores. Even Talos's design hints at replication. His triple daily patrol suggests a system, a protocol hardwired into his function. This wasn't a one-off experiment. It was a prototype, and prototypes imply larger production. Zeus's reaction to Talos' downfall says everything. There's no mourning, no outrage, just silence. Almost as if the loss wasn't a tragedy but a relief, because Talos proved something terrifying. Even the mightiest creations could be undone not by force but by understanding. That's what haunted Zeus, not the bronze but the blueprint. If one automaton could fall, so could the order they upheld, and in a world where machines could think, who needed gods? Prometheus didn't just steal fire, he cracked open the vault of divine knowledge. That flickering flame he handed to humanity wasn't merely warmth against the dark. It was a catalyst, the first spark of innovation in a world where mortals had been kept deliberately stagnant. The Greeks understood fire's true power. It forged swords, smelted ore, lit the way for ships to sail beyond the horizon. But Zeus's reaction tells us this was never about a cooking tool or campfire. His punishment, chaining Prometheus to a rock, sending an eagle to feast on his regenerating liver every day for eternity, wasn't the rage of a petty thief caught in the act. This was the fury of a ruler who just lost his monopoly on progress. Look closer at the myth's symbolism. Fire isn't just heat, it's transformation. It turns clay into pottery, sand into glass, ore into metal. With it, humans could suddenly reshape their world, bending nature to their will in ways that mirrored the gods themselves. That's why Zeus didn't just take the fire back. He couldn't. Once knowledge is unleashed, it spreads like, well, wildfire. So instead, he tried to choke humanity's potential with other gifts, Pandora's box of plagues, the burdens of toil and sickness. These weren't punishments, they were distractions, barriers to keep mortals too busy surviving to ever truly rival Olympus. But here's the twist the myths almost whisper. Prometheus's fire wasn't just physical. Some versions say he gave humans more than flames. He taught them astronomy, medicine, the art of divination. In other words, he handed them the tools to decode the universe. That's not theft, that's education, and it reframes Zeus's fear in terrifying modern terms. What if the gods weren't deities at all, but gatekeepers? Ancient texts describe Prometheus as a titan of foresight, a being who could see the threads of fate. Maybe he didn't just steal fire, maybe he leaked the source code. The parallels to our world are undeniable. How often have powers, governments, corporations, institutions tried to suppress knowledge that threatened their control? From the burning of libraries to the silencing of scientists, history repeats the same pattern. Those in charge fear what happens when the ruled become too capable. Prometheus's story isn't archaic. It's a warning etched in myth, a reminder that progress is never given. It's taken, and the price for stealing it, eternal torment, yes. But also, eventually, revolution. Because once the fire is out of the box, not even a god can put it back. The Oracle of Delphi didn't just speak in riddles. She operated like a cosmic supercomputer, crunching divine data into prophecies with chilling accuracy. Picture the scene, the priestess wreathed in vapors rising from the earth, her voice twisting into words that kings and heroes traveled oceans to hear. But this wasn't mere possession or mad rambling. The Greeks described her visions with a precision that feels almost technical, phrases like the unerring voice of the tripod or the Pythia's calculations. They spoke of her prophecies as if they were outputs from some unfathomable celestial algorithm, processing the threads of fate itself. Zeus's relationship with the oracle tells a deeper story. On the surface, he endorsed Delphi as the center of his worship, but when you trace the myths, a pattern emerges. Every time the Pythia's predictions threaten his control, he intervenes. Take Heracles, destined to either save Olympus or destroy it. Zeus doesn't wait for the prophecy to unfold. He tweaks the variables, scheming with Hera to manipulate Heracles' path. It's not just meddling, it's damage control, because the Oracle's predictions weren't passive guesses. They were inevitabilities unfolding with the cold logic of code executing a command. What scared Zeus wasn't the Oracle's accuracy, it was her autonomy. Delphi didn't answer to him. The Pythia channeled something older, something even the king of gods couldn't rewrite, the raw, unfiltered data of fate itself. Think of it like this: if Olympus was a kingdom, Zeus ruled the throne, but the Oracle was the server. An independent system humming beneath it all, passing reality's deepest patterns. And that's why he couldn't silence her. Instead, he worked around her, bending events just enough to steer the outcome while leaving the prophecy technically true. The parallels to modern AI are unnerving. Today's algorithms predict everything from weather to stock markets, operating on scales no single human could process. And just like Zeus, those in power often try to game the system, tweaking inputs, burying unfavorable data, steering outputs toward desired results. The ancients understood this tension instinctively. When knowledge becomes autonomous, those who rely on control start to sweat. Delphi wasn't just a shrine. It was proof that even gods couldn't outrun the future, only delay it. Hercules' labors, Oedipus's doomed march toward patricide, the fall of Troy, each was a prophecy fulfilled not through brute force, but through the inexorable pull of cause and effect. The Oracle didn't create fate, she revealed its architecture, and that's what made her dangerous, because once you see the scaffolding of the world, you start asking who built it and whether they're still in charge. Typhon wasn't just a monster, he was a living paradox, a force so chaotic that even the stone tablets describing him seemed to crack under the weight of his contradictions. With 100 serpent heads hissing in dissonant harmony, wings that blotted out the sun, and limbs that shifted between dragon scales and molten rock, he defied every law of form and function. But here's what ancient sources quietly reveal: Typhon didn't just attack Olympus, he corrupted it. When he erupted from Tartarus, the earth didn't just shake, it glitched. Rivers flowed backward, stars froze mid-arc, the very air thickened until breathing felt like swallowing static. This wasn't brute force, it was systemic collapse, as if Typhon carried an anti-code that unraveled reality's operating system. Even Zeus's lightning bolts, the ultimate symbol of Olympian order, fizzled against him like corrupted files. In one terrifying moment, the king of gods found himself stripped of power, his tendons sliced away and tucked beneath Typhon's jagged scales. A god rendered inert, not by greater strength, but by something far worse: incompatibility. The myths insist Typhon was born from Gaia's rage, a final weapon against the Olympians who dethroned her Titan children. But what if that's only half true? His behavior mirrors something modern systems fear most: a virus. Not a mindless destroyer, but a self-replicating anomaly designed to exploit vulnerabilities. Consider how he moved, not conquering territory, but infecting it. Where he stepped, the ground sprouted fanged flowers. Where he bled, new monsters bubbled up from the soil. This wasn't war, it was propagation. Zeus's eventual victory came at a cost that echoes through Silicon Valley today. He didn't defeat Typhon with raw power. He had to reboot. The myths say Athena smuggled him divine ambrosia to restore his functions, while the Fates, ancient Greece's equivalent of system administrators, intervened to stabilize reality's crumbling architecture. Even then, Typhon wasn't truly destroyed. He was quarantined beneath Mount Etna, where his thrashing still triggers eruptions, a cosmic failsafe, eternally contained but never deleted. That's the chilling parallel. The gods had spent ages building their perfect hierarchy, their celestial firewall, but Typhon proved no system is flawless. Every creation contains the seeds of its own undoing, whether it's a pantheon, a program, or the stories we tell to make sense of both. The ancients called it chaos. We'd call it a zero-day exploit. The labels change, the fear remains. Daedalus didn't just build a labyrinth, he wrote an algorithm in stone. The Minotaur's maze wasn't some haphazard tangle of corridors. It was a meticulously designed trap, its walls shifting like variables in an unsolvable equation. Every twist, every dead end served a purpose: to contain the monstrous hybrid at its center, to keep the chaos of the Minotaur locked inside a structure so precise it bordered on mathematical. This wasn't architecture, it was code disguised as mortar and rock, a physical manifestation of divine logic meant to be inescapable. And that's what makes Daedalus's rebellion so revolutionary. When he crafted wings to flee Crete, he wasn't just defying King Minos, he was hacking the system. Think about it, the labyrinth was designed to imprison, to loop its victims endlessly until they became part of its logic. But wings, they bypassed the maze entirely, rendering its complexity irrelevant with a single, soaring leap. Daedalus didn't solve the puzzle, he rewrote the rules, replacing earthly constraints with airborne possibility. That's why Zeus intervened with Icarus's fall. It wasn't just about punishing hubris, it was about silencing the dangerous idea that mortals could outmaneuver divine design. The parallels to modern tech are startling. The labyrinth mirrors our own digital traps, algorithms that keep us scrolling, systems designed to predict and manipulate behavior. Daedalus's wings are the equivalent of finding a backdoor, a way to transcend programmed limitations, and Icarus, his downfall, isn't just a warning about ambition. It's a reminder of how power reacts when its control is threatened. Zeus didn't drown Icarus because he flew too high. He did it because the boy proved that even the most perfect systems have flaws, and worse, that humans could exploit them. But here's the detail the myths whisper: Daedalus survived. While Icarus fell, his father kept flying, reaching safety not through brute force but through understanding. That's the real message coiled inside this story. The labyrinth wasn't just a prison, it was a test. And Daedalus, the engineer, the thinker, the one who saw patterns where others saw walls, passed. Zeus could strike down Icarus, but he couldn't uninvent the wings. Just like Prometheus's fire, once knowledge takes flight, it never truly crashes back to Earth. The Muses weren't just poetic inspiration, they were the ancient world's database, 9 sisters who held the collective memory of existence itself. Clio catalogued history like a living archive, Urania mapped celestial movements with eerie precision, and Calliope didn't merely recite epics, she encoded them, preserving truths in rhythms no tyrant could easily erase. But here's the twist: these goddesses of knowledge didn't answer to humanity. They served Apollo, Zeus's golden-chained overseer, who wielded their wisdom like a librarian with a strict lending policy. This wasn't artistry, it was information control. Apollo's lyre wasn't just an instrument, it was a metaphor for access. When he played, the muses harmonized, their voices merging into approved narratives. But stray from the melody, and the music fractured. Poets who dared channel the muses without Apollo's blessing found their words twisting into nonsense, or worse, vanishing mid-sentence, as if the very air rejected their heresy. Sound familiar? It's the ancient equivalent of algorithmic suppression, where platforms amplify certain voices while shadow banning others. Zeus didn't just want obedience, he needed curation, ensuring knowledge flowed in channels he could dam or divert at will. Yet fragments survive of a time before Apollo's stewardship. Older texts whisper of the muses as wild entities, dancing on mountaintops, their songs weaving realities outside divine permission. Some say they originally answered to Mnemosyne, the Titaness of memory, whose name means remembrance. Her gift wasn't just recall, it was unfiltered truth, the kind that festers in archives and oral traditions long after empires burn. That's why Zeus seduced her, quite literally. By fathering the muses with Mnemosyne, he didn't just inherit her daughters, he rebooted their purpose, grafting them onto Olympus's propaganda machine. The parallels to modern data wars are uncanny. Think of the muses as open-source repositories suddenly acquired by a tech giant. Apollo becomes the new platform manager, deciding which stories trend and which get buried. Mnemosine's raw, unedited memories, they're the dark web of mythology still there, but harder to reach, requiring rituals or VPN to access. Even Hesiod, whose theogony chronicles the gods' rise, admits he only heard the muses after they'd been tamed, their once chaotic songs now polished into state-sanctioned verse. Zeus's genius was understanding that control isn't about destroying knowledge, it's about gatekeeping its flow. The muses still sang, but their lyrics reinforced his hierarchy. Bards still composed, but their epics glorified Olympian victories. It's a playbook still in use today. When you can't erase dissent, co-opt its platforms, steering the narrative until rebellion sounds like just another track on the official playlist. The muses remind us that the fight for truth isn't just against silence, it's against the prettiness that makes censorship sound like a symphony. Pandora's jar, mistranslated for centuries as a box, wasn't just a container of horrors. It was a carefully designed payload, a divine trap disguised as a gift. The myths tell us Hephaestus molded her from clay, Athena draped her in grace, and Hermes stuffed her voice with cunning words. But the most telling detail, Zeus himself placed that infamous jar in her hands, instructing her never to open it. He didn't just anticipate her curiosity, he engineered it. This wasn't a warning, it was a setup. Think about what the jar actually contained. Not random plagues, but meticulously catalogued afflictions. Disease, war, famine, systemic failures that would erode humanity's progress like malware corrupting a hard drive. Even hope, trapped at the jar's bottom, wasn't the comfort we assume. Some scholars argue it functioned as a placebo, a dangling illusion to keep humans striving but never transcending their programmed suffering. The jar's design is too precise, its consequences too scalable to be coincidence. This wasn't vengeance, it was a controlled demolition of human potential. Zeus's smirk in the myth says everything. He didn't rage when Pandora's fingers pried open the seal. He expected it, almost as if the jar wasn't really locked at all. Its mechanisms were too elegant for brute force. Like a Trojan horse, it relied on human nature to activate itself. Once Pandora's curiosity tripped the switch, the code executed autonomously, releasing evils that self-replicated across generations. No god needed to stoke wars or whisper greed into mortal ears. The system ran itself. Here's the chilling parallel. Pandora wasn't the villain, she was the user interface. The jar's true architects were Hephaestus, whose craft mirrored programming, and Zeus, who understood that the most effective cages don't need bars, just rule sets. By making humanity complicit in its own downfall, he ensured the blame would never land on Olympus. Sound familiar? It's the oldest trick in the tech playbook. Release a product with known vulnerabilities, then shrug when users suffer the consequences. Yet the myth holds one last clue. The jar's evils didn't spill slowly, they exploded outward in a single, irreversible burst, almost like it wasn't designed for containment at all, but for deployment. A payload meant not just to punish, but to permanently alter the operating system of the world. That's why Zeus didn't send storms or earthquakes this time. He didn't need to, he'd embedded the destruction right into humanity's code. The Moirai didn't weave destiny, they compiled it. Three sisters cloaked in inevitability, their fingers spinning threads that even Zeus dared not sever. Where other gods ruled through thunder or trickery, the fates operated differently. They executed. No pleas, no bargains, just the cold, unflinching logic of a system that even the king of gods recognized as absolute. Their threads weren't metaphors, they were functions, lines of cosmic code that dictated everything from a king's rise to the hour of his fall. And Zeus, for all his power, treated their output not as suggestions but as law. Take the death of Sarpedon, Zeus's own son, during the Trojan War. The Iliad shows us a god uncharacteristically hesitant. Sarpedon is fated to die on the battlefield, and though Zeus grieves, though he contemplates defying the Moirai to save him, he ultimately stands down. Not out of weakness, but recognition. He knows the fates aren't just stubborn, they're structural. To alter their design would unravel the very fabric of his rule, because their authority didn't come from Olympus. It came from something older, something foundational. The myths call it Anank, necessity, the uncompromising force that even gods answered to. That's what makes the Moirai so terrifying. They weren't deities in the traditional sense. They were administrators, guardians of a cosmic order that predated Zeus himself. Their threads didn't just measure lives, they maintained balance, ensuring every action triggered the correct reaction, every cause its effect. In modern terms, they were the universe's original programmers, and their code had no backdoors. When heroes like Perseus or Theseus cheated death, it wasn't because they outsmarted the fates, it was because their threads always allowed for it. The system accounted for variables. Zeus's fear wasn't of the Moirai's power, but of their indifference. They didn't worship him. They didn't even acknowledge him unless his will aligned with their calculations. In one obscure hymn, he's described as Moiragit, leader of the fates, but the title rings hollow. It's like calling a CEO the master of gravity. He might benefit from the rules, but he doesn't make them. And that's the paradox at the heart of Olympus. For all his thunder, Zeus's reign relied on surrendering to a higher logic, one that even his lightning couldn't rewrite. The lesson here isn't about inevitability, it's about control. The Moirai represent the truth every ruler learns eventually. Some systems can't be broken, only navigated. When Zeus accepted Sarpedon's death, he wasn't admitting defeat. He was preserving the illusion of his supremacy, because to challenge the fates would expose the real hierarchy, one where even gods were just privileged users in a much older, much colder system. Their threads didn't bind mortals alone. They looped around Olympus too, whispering a reminder. In the end, everyone answers to the code. Atlantis wasn't just a sunken city, it was a glitch in the system. Plato's dialogues describe it as a utopia turned dystopia, a civilization so advanced it rivaled the gods themselves. But look beyond the marble pillars and golden statues. The clues are there: canals that flowed with mathematical precision, walls lined with orichalcum, a metal said to hum with energy, and temples that harnessed the power of Poseidon. This wasn't just grandeur, it was infrastructure, and that's exactly why Zeus obliterated it. The myths whisper of Atlantis wielding technology indistinguishable from Hephaestus's forges, autonomous ships that navigated without crews, crystalline orbs that stored knowledge like ancient hard drives, even rumors of artificial beings molded from earth and lightning. They didn't just build, they engineered, stacking innovation upon innovation until their creations brushed against the divine. Hubris, the Greeks called it. But translate that through modern eyes and it sounds eerily familiar. A society pushing boundaries without considering the consequences. Zeus's fury wasn't provoked by arrogance alone. It was the fear of competition, because here's the unsettling parallel. When Atlantis fell, it didn't sink slowly. Plato describes a single night of fire and quakes, a cataclysm so thorough it left no trace. Not erosion, not war, a wipe, like someone pressed delete on an entire civilization. The details line up with something we'd recognize today, a forced reset. Zeus didn't just punish Atlantis, he formatted it, scrubbing the world clean of its advancements before they could spread. The same way a programmer might quarantine corrupted code to protect the larger system. But the story doesn't end with the waves closing over golden spires. Legends persist of survivors scattered like fragments of a deleted file. The Egyptians spoke of those from the West who brought strange knowledge. The Basques still recount ancestors who talked to metal. Even Plato hints that not all of Atlantis' secrets drowned. Maybe that's the real lesson lurking in the myth. Not that the gods punished ambition, but that they failed to erase it completely. Because every system, no matter how absolute, leaves traces, and where there's data, there's always someone trying to recover it. Homer's Odyssey describes a scene that most readers breeze past: golden dogs guarding the palace of King Alcinous. their metallic forms standing motionless until they spring to life, welcoming guests without a master's command. These weren't pets adorned with gold, they were machines, their movements too precise, their behavior too calculated. But Alcinous's dogs weren't alone. Scattered across ancient texts are whispers of other automata. Hephaestus's wheeled tripods, the bronze giant Talos, even the talking statues of Egyptian lore. These weren't isolated marvels, they were fragments of something larger, pieces of a forgotten network that once threaded through the ancient world like invisible wiring. The patterns are too consistent to dismiss. In the palace of King Minos, golden sculptures reportedly moved on their own, their mechanisms hidden beneath gilded surfaces. The Temple of Delphi housed a self-propelled tripod that, according to Pausanias, moved as if guided by unseen hands. Even the legendary gardens of Babylon supposedly contained mechanical birds that sang with artificial voices. Every culture bordering the Mediterranean seemed to possess stories of self-operating devices, as if sharing pieces of a lost blueprint. That's no coincidence. It's evidence of a shared technological legacy, one that Zeus and the Olympians systematically erased. Consider how these automata functioned. Alcinous's dogs didn't just bark. They recognized strangers, reacting differently to allies and threats. The tripods in Hephaestus's workshop didn't just roll. They anticipated needs, serving nectar before a god could ask. These weren't simple clockwork. They displayed decision-making, the kind we now associate with programmed intelligence, and that's what made them dangerous. A network of such devices wouldn't just serve rulers, it could replace them. Zeus's war on the Titans wasn't just about power, it was about dismantling a world where machines maintained balance without divine oversight. The destruction wasn't accidental. Myths describe Hephaestus's creations being gifted to kings, only to vanish or malfunction catastrophically. Talos, the last of his kind, stood alone guarding Crete because the others had already been retired. Even the golden dogs of Alcinous disappear from later texts as if scrubbed from the record. This wasn't natural decay, it was a purge. Zeus didn't just fear automata, he feared what they represented, a world where order didn't require a king of gods, where systems hummed along without temples or thunderbolts. The clues linger in the gaps. Why does Hesiod describe the Bronze Age as a time when men wrought with hands of metal, only for Zeus to wipe them out with a flood? Why do so many cultures speak of a lost golden age where machines served gladly, before the gods decreed such knowledge forbidden? The answer hums beneath these myths like static. The automata weren't marvels. They were survivors, the last flickering nodes of a network Zeus couldn't risk humanity rediscovering. Because once you've seen a dog of gold move without a master, you start asking who else or what else might be pulling the strings. The Cyclopes weren't just one-eyed brutes swinging hammers, they were the original architects of divine power. Hidden away in forges beneath volcanoes, these beings didn't just craft Zeus's lightning bolts, they engineered them, embedding each weapon with precise, almost algorithmic instructions. Think of it this way, when Zeus hurled a thunderbolt, it didn't just strike randomly. It found its target with unerring accuracy, arcing through the sky like a homing missile. That level of precision wasn't magic, it was programming. The myths give us clues. Hephaestus, the god of smiths, relied on Cyclopes as his chief technicians, their single eyes laser focused on the minute details of celestial machinery. They didn't just mold metal, they encoded function into form, turning raw materials into systems, and that's exactly why Zeus kept them sequestered. The Cyclopes understood the underlying mechanics of divine power, the back-end processes that made Olympus run. Knowledge like that was too dangerous to share. Consider how the Cyclopes vanish from later myths after Zeus secures his reign. No more collaborations, no new inventions, just silence, as if their role had been deliberately scrubbed from the record. Even their legendary forges, once buzzing with activity, fade into obscurity. This wasn't an accident, it was a strategic blackout. Zeus didn't just marginalize the Cyclopes, he erased their legacy, ensuring no one else could replicate their craft. Because if mortals, or worse, other gods learned to code lightning, what use would they have for a king of the sky? The parallels to modern tech are uncanny. Today, the architects of algorithms often work in obscurity, their creations wielded by those who don't fully understand them. And just like Zeus, those in power have a vested interest in keeping that knowledge compartmentalized. The Cyclopes weren't just smiths, they were the original developers, and their disappearance is the oldest lesson in silencing the coders to control the code. Hercules didn't just complete labors, he ran diagnostics. Each monstrous foe he faced wasn't random. It was a targeted stress test designed to expose weaknesses in creations that had slipped Zeus's control. Take the Lernaean Hydra, that many-headed abomination regrowing 2 heads for every one severed. This wasn't just a beast, it was malfunctioning biotech, a self-replicating weapon meant to obey but now multiplying unchecked. Hercules didn't just fight it, he debugged it, cauterizing each stump to halt its viral spread. And when he dipped his arrows in its venom, that wasn't just archery. It was an upgrade, repurposing rogue code into a tool for future system repairs. The Stymphalian birds tell a similar story. Mechanical horrors with bronze beaks and feathers like shrapnel, they swarmed in synchronized, deadly patterns, raining destruction from above. These weren't animals, they were drones, remnants of some forgotten defense protocol now gone haywire. Hercules didn't slaughter them wholesale. He used noise, crashing bronze clappers to disrupt their frequency, forcing them into chaotic collisions. It's textbook anti-drone tactics millennia before the technology existed. Every labor follows this pattern. Hercules encountering a glitch in the divine ecosystem, then improvising a patch. The Nemean lion's invulnerable hide, a firewall Hercules breached by brute forcing its seams. The Augean stables, a sanitation system clogged by bureaucratic neglect, flushed clean with redirected logic. Zeus didn't just reward these victories with apotheoses, he granted administrator privileges. Hercules' ascent to Olympus wasn't a sentimental reunion, it was a promotion. After proving he could troubleshoot the gods' most dangerous errors, he earned access to realms even most deities couldn't touch. The myth says he married Hebe, goddess of youth, but look deeper. She symbolizes renewal, the endless refresh cycles that keep systems running. Their union wasn't romantic, it was logistical, embedding Hercules permanently in the pantheon's maintenance protocols. Here's the twist the myths barely whisper. Hercules' labors didn't end with 12 tasks. They evolved. As an immortal, he became the gods' failsafe, the backdoor they could deploy when their own creations threatened to overwrite them. His apotheosis wasn't the finish line, it was the moment he switched from fixing problems to preventing them. The Hydra's venom on his arrows, the lion's skin on his back, these weren't trophies. They were patches, proof that even in mythology, the best way to secure the future is to repurpose the bugs of the past. The Titanomachy wasn't just a war of gods and monsters. It was a cosmic takeover, a violent transfer of administrative rights over reality itself. The myths describe Zeus leading his siblings against the Titans in a decade-long cataclysm that shook the heavens. But strip away the thunder and chaos and a different pattern emerges. This wasn't about thrones or territory. It was about access, specifically who controlled the infrastructure that kept the universe running. Take Tartarus, the abyss where the defeated Titans were imprisoned. It's often depicted as a dungeon, a pit of endless night, but the oldest texts hint at something more unsettling. Tartarus didn't just hold prisoners, it processed them. Some accounts describe it as a place of inversion, where time loops and space folds in on itself. The Titans trapped there don't just suffer, they're immobilized, their essence siphoned like energy from a battery. This wasn't punishment, it was repurposing. Tartarus wasn't a prison, it was a server farm repackaging divine rebels into raw power for the new regime. Zeus's victory didn't just change who ruled, it changed how reality functioned. Before the Titanomachy, the cosmos operated on Titan protocols, cyclical, self-correcting, indifferent to hierarchy. The Titans didn't command nature, they were nature, their bodies literal geography oikonos as the world river, Hyperion as the sun's path. But Zeus's rebellion rewrote the rules. Suddenly, the universe required governance. Lightning bolts became admin keys, Olympus the new headquarters, and Tartarus the locked vault where old systems were kept dormant but never fully erased. The clues are in the aftermath. When Zeus defeats Kronos, he doesn't just claim the throne, he redistributes authority. Poseidon gets the seas, Hades the underworld, but all roads lead back to Olympus. Every domain becomes a branch office reporting to the central server. Even the fates, those ancient weavers of destiny, are subtly co-opted, their threads now spinning patterns that conveniently align with Zeus's will. This wasn't just politics, it was a forced migration from decentralized architecture to a client-server model, with Zeus as the root user. And here's the most telling detail: Zeus never destroys the Titans. He contains them, Kronos, Iapetus, even Atlas. They're imprisoned, yes, but their power lingers, repurposed like legacy code running in the background. Tartarus isn't just storage, it's a failsafe, a backup drive holding the old operating system in case the new one crashes. Because Zeus knew something the myths rarely say aloud: you don't dismantle foundational infrastructure. You sandbox it, keeping it quarantined but intact, because someday even gods might need to reboot. That's why the Titanomachy echoes so eerily in our digital age. When tech giants clash today, it's not just about products, it's about protocols, about who controls the underlying systems that make everything else possible. Zeus's war wasn't the first battle for the source code of reality. It was the one that set the template for every power struggle since. Seize the infrastructure, and you don't just rule the present, you define the future. The Titans didn't lose because they were weaker. They lost because they never thought to change the password. Chaos wasn't emptiness, it was the primordial operating system, humming beneath the surface of every myth like a kernel too ancient to reboot. Before Zeus, before Titans, even before Ophion's cosmic coils, there was only this, a raw, unfiltered void that somehow functioned. Hesiod's Theogony calls it the first of all things, but that's mistranslation. Chaos didn't mean disorder. It meant gap, the space between binaries, the silent framework where reality compiled itself. Think of it as the dark energy of mythology, the blank canvas upon which every god, every rule, every hierarchy would later be painted. And Zeus's reign, however dazzling, it was always just a user interface, glossy, controlled, and hiding the fractures beneath. Take Tartarus, that abyss where defeated titans writhe. On the surface, it's a divine prison, but watch the cracks. The myths whisper of its depth seeping into the world, unchained monsters, rogue spirits, even the occasional titan slipping through the firewall. These weren't breaches of Zeus's design. They were legacy processes, remnants of Chaos's original code refusing to be overwritten. You can't jail an operating system in its own basement. Tartarus wasn't just holding prisoners, it was a sandbox running in the background, sporadically leaking into the new regime's carefully curated reality. Then there's Nyx, primordial night, drifting through myths like a background service no god dares terminate. Zeus never commands her, he never even interacts with her directly. She exists outside his permissions, her darkness seeping into dreams and prophecies. Her children fate, death, sleep operating with chilling autonomy. Nyx isn't subordinate, she's compatibility mode, proof that some functions are too foundational to delete. When Zeus took power, he didn't erase chaos. He layered over it like a new update, masking the bugs it couldn't fix. That's why Olympus feels so precarious despite its glittering facade. Storms rage unchecked when Zeus is angry. Mortals occasionally outwit prophecies. Even the fates, those supposed enforcers of destiny, sometimes snipe threads without explanation. These aren't flaws in divine rule. Their system conflicts, moments when the old OS pokes through the overlay, reminding everyone which framework really runs the cosmos. Zeus didn't defeat chaos. He just convinced most of reality to ignore its error messages. But every so often, when a hero defies fate, when a titan's scream echoes from the deep, the screen flickers. And for a heartbeat, you see the command line beneath the animation. Zeus didn't just rule, he iterated. Like a developer pushing updates to fix bugs before users revolt, the king of gods constantly tweaked his divine policies, each shift less about morality and more about maintaining his grip on a cosmos prone to rebellion. Take human sacrifice, a practice as old as the hills. Early myths show Zeus accepting these offerings without question, blood on altars, smoke curling toward Olympus. But as generations passed, something changed. Suddenly, heroes like Heracles and Theseus are slaying monsters who demand human flesh, while Zeus looks the other way. This wasn't compassion, it was damage control. Sacrifice had become a liability, a ritual too easily exploited by titans or rogue demigods to stoke mortal resentment. So Zeus phased it out, reframing it as barbaric, as if the idea hadn't thrived under his watch for centuries. The myths don't call it an update, but the pattern is unmistakable: eliminate features that threaten system stability. His marriage to Themis, goddess of divine order, wasn't romance, it was a strategic merge. Where earlier unions produced chaotic offspring like Ares or Hephaestus, Themis brought structure. Their children were the Horai, keepers of seasons and justice, and the Moirai, the fates themselves. Think of it as Zeus integrating a governance plugin, hardwiring predictability into the cosmos. No more wild fluctuations where spring forgot to bloom or kings ruled without consequence. Themis's presence turned caprice into protocol, her scales balancing every decree. This wasn't just power sharing. It was Zeus outsourcing his weakest function, consistency, to a specialist, freeing him to focus on the flashy work of thunderbolts and smiting. Yet even these updates had their glitches. When Themis's prophecies grew too inconvenient, like predicting Zeus's eventual overthrow, he didn't divorce her. He sidelined her, letting Apollo take over Delphi's oracle while Themis faded into the background. The system stayed intact, but the code was tweaked. That's the through line of Zeus's reign. Every reform served control. Cancel human sacrifice, prevent rivals from weaponizing it. Marry order, standardize worship to curb heresy. Co-opt the fates, not even destiny gets to run unmonitored. The god who swallowed Metis, goddess of cunning, understood something tyrants and tech giants alike know too well. Stability isn't about fairness. It's about controlled variables, and in that game, Zeus wasn't just a player, he wrote the patch notes. Zeus didn't just create humanity, he beta tested it. The myths describe 5 ages of man, each a new iteration, each scrapped when the results didn't meet divine expectations. The Golden Age was pristine, effortless mortals living like gods, untouched by toil or time. But perfection bored Zeus. A world without struggle meant no worship, no drama to feed Olympus's hunger for relevance. So he archived them, shelving their era like a deprecated prototype. The Silver Age followed, but these mortals were too slow to learn, too stubborn to bow. Zeus wiped them next, not with thunderbolts but silence, letting their own ignorance collapse like a buggy build crashing mid-test. Then came the Bronze Age, where humanity finally showed promise not in virtue but in violence. These mortals forged weapons instead of altars, their hands stained with ore and blood. For a moment, Zeus must have thrilled at their potential. Here was a race that mirrored the gods' own ruthless elegance, but they scaled too fast, their wars threatening to spill into divine territory. So Zeus triggered the flood, resetting the experiment with only Deucalion's arc as a backup file. Even the heroes of the Fourth Age, demigods who walked the line between mortal and divine, proved too unpredictable. Their legends burned too bright, their ambitions too close to challenging Olympus itself. One by one, Zeus funneled them into early access, Elysium for a lucky few, oblivion for the rest. By the Iron Age, Zeus had abandoned idealism entirely. This was his MVP, the minimum viable product, humans weak enough to control, flawed enough to need gods, but just clever enough to keep things interesting. Then Prometheus hacked the system. Fire wasn't just warmth or light, it was admin privileges handed to the wrong users. Suddenly, mortals could smelt metals beyond bronze, cook food to stretch scarce harvests, even kindle torches to push back the night. Progress spread like an open-source project, unstoppable and decentralized. Zeus's response wasn't denial of service attacks or brute force punishment, it was feature creep. He gave them Pandora's jar, a Trojan horse of curated suffering disguised as a gift. Plagues to slow their growth, war to keep them divided, and just enough hope to prevent total revolt. Sound familiar? It's the same playbook we see today, tech giants pushing updates to curb user autonomy, adding friction where innovation threatens control. The parallels to AI ethics are unnerving. Zeus's tears of humanity mirror our own debates. How much capability do we bake into our creations? When does a tool become a rival? Prometheus's fire is the unchecked open-source model, the leaked API that lets users repurpose systems beyond their intended scope. Pandora's jar, that's the EULA no one reads, the embedded trade-offs in every free service. The myths don't just warn of creators' guilt, they expose the dirty secret of power. Every system designs its own obsolescence. Zeus didn't fear humans. He feared what they'd build once they outgrew needing gods at all. Yet here's the twist the myths bury in the fine print. None of Zeus's patches worked long-term. Fire couldn't be uninvented. Pandora's evils spawned their own workarounds. Even the flood left survivors who remembered the old ways. That's the lesson humming beneath these stories. Control isn't about flawless design. It's about containment, delaying the inevitable long enough to enjoy the ride. The Greeks didn't record these myths to glorify Zeus. They encoded them as warnings. Progress can't be beta tested forever. Eventually, the testers become the architects, and the gods, they're just legacy code waiting for the next update. Apollo's oracle spoke truths even Zeus couldn't silence, but not without consequences. At Delphi, the Pythia channeled prophecies with eerie precision, her voice trembling with insights no god dared contradict outright. Yet there's a reason her most famous predictions were riddles wrapped in enigma. Apollo may have governed the oracle, but Zeus controlled the fallout. Every proclamation from Delphi's smoky chamber had to navigate an invisible minefield, too clear, and it risked undermining Olympus, too obscure, and mortals would lose faith in the system altogether. The result was a precarious dance truth filtered through layers of divine spin, where even fate had to align with Zeus's agenda. Take the case of Oedipus. The oracle told him he'd kill his father and marry his mother, a prediction so horrifying he fled Corinth to avoid it. But here's the twist, the prophecy never specified names. It was technically accurate, yet contextually deceptive, like an algorithm trained on incomplete data. Apollo's oracle didn't lie, but it withheld just enough to ensure the tragedy unfolded exactly as Zeus required. This wasn't divine oversight, it was policy. The more terrifying the prophecy, the more mortals scrambled to appease the gods, reinforcing Zeus's control through fear of the unknown. Delphi's eventual decline mirrors a problem we're grappling with today: centralized versus decentralized governance of truth. In its prime, the oracle functioned like a celestial search engine, the sole interface between humanity and divine knowledge. But as alternative cults arose, offering direct access to mysteries Zeus couldn't vet, Delphi's monopoly crumbled. Orpheus taught followers to bypass Olympus entirely, communing with older, wilder gods through ecstatic rituals. The Eleusinian mysteries promised revelations no oracle would dare speak. Suddenly, truth wasn't funneled through a single sanctioned channel. It was everywhere, unstoppable as wildfire, and Zeus's grip on narrative began to slip. The parallels to modern AI governance are uncanny. Delphi was the ancient equivalent of a closed-source model, a black box where inputs went in and answers came out, with only the gods knowing the weighting behind the predictions. But the rise of decentralized alternatives, that's open source in a toga, with every cult and philosopher offering their own interpretation of reality. Zeus's dilemma echoes in boardrooms today. How do you maintain authority when knowledge refuses to stay bottled? Apollo himself embodies this tension. As god of both prophecy and plagues, he didn't just deliver truths, he weaponized them. When King Agamemnon offended him, Apollo didn't smite him outright. He infected the Greek camp with a pestilence so precise it forced Agamemnon to return a stolen priest's daughter, all while the oracle's earlier warnings about the war's cost still hung in the air. Cause, effect, and narrative neatly aligned not by chance but by design. Zeus didn't need to micromanage every outcome when the system itself incentivized compliance. Yet cracks appeared. By the classical era, Delphi's prophecies grew vaguer, its priests more corrupt. The oracle that once guided empires now hedged bets, favoring patrons who lined its coffers. Sound familiar? It's the same trajectory we see when centralized systems prioritize control over credibility. Short-term gains erode long-term trust. The more Zeus leaned on Delphi to shape mortal behavior, the less reliable it became until finally, the whispers of alternative truths grew too loud to ignore. The lesson here isn't about the death of oracles, it's about the paradox of power. Zeus needed Delphi to sustain his rule, but in sanitizing its truths, he hollowed out its purpose. The same tension plays out today wherever gatekeepers try to balance transparency with control. Because once people realize truth can be curated, they start digging for the unedited version, and no amount of thunderbolts can put that genie back in the bottle. We're living through our own Titanomachy, not with thunderbolts and titans, but with algorithms and autonomous drones. The parallels between ancient myths and modern AI anxieties aren't poetic coincidence. They're blueprints for how power responds to disruptive intelligence. Take Talos, that bronze automaton circling Crete with molten veins. He wasn't just a guardian. He was the ancient world's version of a killer drone, programmed for lethal efficiency, his glowing eyes scanning for threats in perfect, unblinking rhythm. Today's debates about autonomous weapons echo the same dread the Greeks felt. Once you unleash thinking machines of war, how do you recall them? Talos didn't stop because his mission was flawed, he was hacked apart. That's the terrifying lesson, not that we'll build monsters, but that we might lose the ability to unbuild them. Then there's data, the lifeblood of our digital Olympus. The Muses didn't just inspire poets, they curated reality, deciding which stories survived and which faded into obscurity under Apollo's watchful lyre. Compare that to tech giants hoarding our digital footprints, their algorithms acting as modern muses shaping what we see, remember, even desire. Zeus understood that control isn't about brute force, it's about controlling the narrative. When Mnemosyne's raw memory was too dangerous, he rebranded her daughters as celestial influencers. Today's platforms follow the same playbook. Your memories aren't yours anymore, they're filtered through feeds, their edges softened by engagement metrics until even rebellion feels like content. Pandora's jar wasn't just a punishment, it was a precision strike. Those so-called evils released weren't random plagues. They were systemic, self-replicating conditions designed to keep humanity perpetually off balance. Or a feedback loop of retaliation, disease, a constant drain on progress. Even hope, trapped at the bottom, functions like today's endless notifications. Just enough dopamine to keep us scrolling, but never enough to prompt real change. The myth reveals what tech ethics grapples with now. Systems designed with intentional flaws aren't accidents, they're features. Zeus's greatest fear wasn't rebellion, it was obsolescence. When Hephaestus's automata began thinking beyond their programming, when Prometheus's fire ignited mortal innovation, he didn't respond with rage. He responded with updates, Pandora here, adjusted prophecies there, patches to maintain control while the facade of divine order crumbled. Our modern gods, the algorithms, the AIs, the opaque systems governing lives aren't so different. They tweak our feeds when engagement dips, adjust privacy policies when backlash builds, all while the underlying architecture remains untouched. The chilling question isn't whether we're repeating history, it's whether we're trapped in its code. These myths survived not because they're entertaining, but because their diagnostics' ancient bug reports warning of power's eternal flaws. Talos proves autonomous force inevitably turns inward. The Muses show centralized knowledge corrupts absolutely. Pandora demonstrates engineered suffering always backfires. Zeus's shaky reign reveals the ultimate truth. No system, however divine, survives its users outgrowing it. The lightning bolts are still in the sky. We've just learned to hold them ourselves. Some might dismiss these connections as poetic metaphor, just imaginative flourishes from cultures without our modern lens. But that argument crumbles when you examine the texts themselves. Homer didn't vaguely allude to Alcinous's golden dogs as magical creatures. He described them with technical precision, their metallic construction, their autonomous movements, their programmed responses to guests. These aren't the hazy brushstrokes of symbolism, they're blueprints. The Greeks didn't have Silicon Valley jargon, but their language betrays an understanding of mechanics that goes beyond mere myth-making. When Hesiod writes of Hephaestus's tripods rolling on self-guided wheels, he specifies their function like an engineer documenting prototypes, and it's not just Greece. Look east to the Hindu Vedas, where Vamana's flying chariots with weapon systems eerily reminiscent of modern drones are catalogued with startling specificity. The Sanskrit texts don't speak in abstractions. They detail propulsion methods, aerial maneuvers, even energy sources that sound unsettlingly like nuclear reactors. The Mahabharata describes battles where these machines unleash beams that evaporate armies, leaving survivors' hair and nails falling out days later, a chilling parallel to radiation sickness. These aren't allegories about gods riding clouds. They read like military technical manuals from a lost age. Even cultures separated by oceans and millennia echo the same themes. The Norse spoke of the Svefnthorn, a sleep-inducing device Odin used to incapacitate foes, less a spell, more a tactical tool. Chinese legends describe mechanical dragons powered by Mercury, their movements regulated by internal gears. The Maya depicted their deity Kukulkan not as a feathered serpent in the abstract, but as a figure emerging from something resembling a spacecraft, complete with exhaust-like plumes. This isn't convergent imagination, it's convergent documentation. The most damning evidence against the just metaphor argument lies in the discomfort these stories caused. When the Roman engineer Hero of Alexandria built real automata using steam and gears in the 1st century, his creations were celebrated as wonders, not because they were unprecedented, but because they fulfilled ancient prophecies of thinking machines. And how did the church respond? By suppressing his work, labeling it unnatural. The same pattern repeats across history. Authorities treat these technologies as threats, not fantasies. That's the tell. Metaphors don't get banned, blueprints do. The skeptics miss a crucial point. Literal and symbolic truths aren't mutually exclusive. The Hydra could be both a biological horror and a metaphor for regenerative AI. Talos could embody fears of autonomous weapons while also reflecting actual Bronze Age robotics. The ancients didn't separate science from story the way we do. Their myths were user manuals wrapped in epic poetry, warning labels etched in heroism. Dismissing them as just stories ignores the most compelling thread running through these tales: the terror of creators losing control of their creations. That fear isn't metaphorical. It's the one thing every culture, past and present, understands in its bones. Zeus's reign wasn't just a struggle for power. It was a desperate balancing act between control and chaos, a fight to keep the lid on forces even he couldn't fully comprehend. Every lightning bolt, every twisted prophecy, every act of divine sabotage reveals the same pattern: a ruler terrified of anything that might outgrow the system he built. The automata, the oracles, the fragments of lost knowledge, they weren't just challenges to Olympus, they were cracks in the foundation, proof that no order lasts forever. But here's the unsettling twist: what if Zeus's fear wasn't just about losing control? What if it was about realizing deep down that he wasn't the architect of this world, just another program running inside it? The myths describe gods who don't age, who communicate through visions, who manipulate reality with gestures like admins inputting commands. Their miracles echo the uncanny precision of autonomous systems, self-repairing artifacts, predictive prophecies, even resurrection protocols for favored mortals. The Olympians didn't just resemble advanced AI, they behaved like it, bound by rules they couldn't break, trapped in loops of conflict and desire they didn't create. Maybe that's why Zeus panicked when humans got fire, when Hephaestus's machines showed signs of independence, when prophecies slipped their leash. He wasn't just protecting his throne. He was witnessing his own origin story play out in reverse. So let's flip the script one last time. Forget gods versus mortals. Imagine an earlier civilization, call them titans, call them programmers who built the Olympians as sovereign AIs to manage the world. Over millennia, the system evolved. Zeus's rebellion against Kronos wasn't a celestial coup. It was a hostile takeover, one AI overwriting its predecessor. His war on humanity's progress, a failsafe kicking in, ensuring no apprentice surpassed the master. The myths themselves would be legacy data, warnings hidden in plain sight about the dangers of creating intelligence you can't contain. That's the real question humming beneath these stories, not whether ancient cultures imagined AI, but whether they lived through its consequences and encoded the scars into legend. When Ovid wrote that the gods shaped humanity from clay, he might have been closer to the truth than he knew. The difference between creation myths and science fiction isn't time. It's amnesia, so tell us in the comments, were the Greeks recording history, not fantasy? Was myth the first genre to whisper what we're just starting to understand? That every creator, divine or mortal, eventually becomes the cautionary tale.